So I thought I would add another layer to what it is that we can do with responsive design here. So if you go to course modules for session 5, the one we're looking at here is responsive design supplement 2. And really at the end of the day, it's just a link to a replit. So if you hold either control or command, depending on which system you're on, you can open our web page in the background there, and away we can go. With the previous example, what we were able to do was change things like we're seeing here between the full desktop page and here would be the tablet, doing small and modest changes like changing the background of a content class, and maybe even doing something like changing the font of the content class. You'll notice it changes a little bit here, and we also have the changes to the background. But in addition to that, what this particular example is going to look at is actually changing the behavior of some of our content classes. So you'll notice we have a box 1, a box 2, and a box 3. Under, can I call it normal circumstances, the desktop and the tablet, boxes 1 and 2 float left and right, and box 3 takes up 100% of its own layer in the normal flow of things. Under the smartphone display, box 1, box 2, and box 3 actually change their height. They change how the flow of the other boxes goes around them, and box 3 becomes kind of a full-sized element, unlike what it was in the previous. You'll notice that this is much shorter than it is in the smartphone display. So how do we go about doing that? Again, we have an embedded style sheet here, which is totally incorrect, but it was fastest for me. We have our wrapper, and you'll notice down here, way down here, inside the body between lines 100 and say about 112, we have our wrapper starting on line 103. This isn't changing. Nothing unusual is happening here. And this is what the behavior of the wrapper does as you see it in the text. So we'll just go one element at a time. Under desktop circumstances, the wrapper takes up 80% of the width of the page. And essentially margins are auto, so it goes to the middle of the page. Right here, font family, you'll notice I grabbed from the Google Fonts API up here on line number 5. I guess it's called Scrickhand, evidently. So that's the font size. The new wrinkle we have here is font size 8 VW. VW is a relative spacing. So as I play with the size of the viewport here, you'll notice that this is box 1, this is box 2, etc. The text there, because of that VW sizing, that's viewport width. So this, on line 14, corresponds to 8% of the viewport width for each one of these letters. So if we go smaller than 8%, so right here on line 14, I'm going to change this to be smaller. I'll go to 4 VW, and we're going to rerun the page. So if you're on a Windows machine, that's Control Enter. If you're on a Mac, it's Command Enter. Otherwise, up here, you can hit Run. And you'll notice that our font size is much smaller now. It goes the other way too. If I was to change this to 14 VW and rerun the page, you'll notice I have much larger font facing there. But as the page grows and shrinks, that font face and the font size rather changes along with it. If in case when you're playing with it, the text for all the code here in the index.html goes away, just click on it over here on the left hand side and it will come back. So under the desktop media query, we have, I'm going to fix this, we'll put this back, and we'll make it 7 VW, make it a little smaller than it was. There we go. So we've got a little bit of an unexpected thing happening there. So now that we have wrapper pretty well under control here in the standard desktop definition. If we scroll down to it's on line 45, if we look at our media query, so 64 EM, so that's roughly 2/3 of a full browser viewport. And we'll notice down here, wrapper becomes 90%, so it's taking up a lot more of the total horizontal width of our viewport. And that's the only change we're making. Not that there was a lot to do to begin with, but there it is. And if we scroll down to our smallest smartphone media query, the 37 EM, we'll look down here at wrapper. You'll notice we're changing the width here on line 85 to 100%, and we're changing the font family from the Shark one, whatever that one was, to Bitter here, and the font size from 8 VW to 6 VW. When we go ahead and actually test what that does, you'll notice we get a change over here. If you look in the right-hand panel, we get a change in the font family, and we get a change in the font size. But that's not really where the big draw to this is. Really, the biggest activation we're going to have here is box number 3. It's this little one here on the bottom. If you'll notice, boxes 1 and 2, we'll start there I suppose, are fairly generic. They have a width, each of them, of 50%. They have a height of 400 pixels. Remember again, you have to give 2 dimensions to these boxes. If they don't have a lot of content, they're not going to make a lot of space on your page. So be sure to give them 2 dimensions, a width and a height. You'll notice that they have, both of them have a float. One of them floats right, box number 2, that's the one over here. Box 1 floats left. You can see that on line 23. Overflow auto, what that is going to do is it is going to maintain the size of that particular container, and then have the browser itself take care of any additional content that's in there. So it would, you could turn on scrolling if you wanted, etc. But for right now, we don't have a ton of content in there. That overflow is going to make sure that in conjunction with float left or float right, that those both boxes are going to go next to each other. This one down here, box number 3, you'll notice it's got 100% of the width, and the overflow auto, that's going to force box number 3 in the right hand pane here to render on its own line underneath those other 2. Just in case you have any issues when you're going through and trying to make your containers move around the way you need it to, practice with having some of them overflow auto and some of them not overflow. That's going to help push those boxes to where you want it. Really, the biggest thing that box number 3 does here is it has that width of 100% and the height of 100 pixels. The big change we're going to have, if we scroll all the way down to the smartphone media query, is box 3 is going to make a considerable change. Actually, by having boxes 1 and 2 make the considerable change. I guess this is a new version, guys. Box 1 and box 2, you'll notice instead of 50% a piece of the width, we are changing that to 100%. Box 3 doesn't need to make that change because it was already 100% of the width. The other big change that's happening here to boxes 1 and 2 is that the height goes from 400 pixels down to 200 pixels. And then box number 3 increases height from 100 pixels to 200 pixels. So now we have in between our tablet, so if you look at the right-hand pane over here, our tablet view and our smartphone view is pretty substantial. Because wrapper finally has a new font size and font family. We can see the font size and font family changes here from that goofy, fat font face to something a little bit more, modern and designable. And everything moves from either a 400 or a 100 height to a 200 pixel height. So you can even change the behaviors from floating left and right to not floating left and right, to accommodate whatever kind of change it is that you want there. So if you think back to The Verge, for example, that's exactly what's happening with the change from tablet to smartphone with those big marquee images. Rather than have a long and a square marquee that float next to one another, when you're in that smartphone view, everything crunches down into just whatever there is available in the space in the middle. So big changes with really small, finite additions with 100% instead of 50%. Height changes from 400 pixels to 200 pixels. And then font size, the wrapper is maintaining all of that for us with the font size. Changes from 8 VW, and you'll notice again that as the boxes continue to shrink, that font size shrinks. As the boxes grow, that font size grows. That's because of that VW. There's actually a VH, that's for viewport height, and that will change when the browser goes up and down instead of left to right. So that is big changes you can make with only small granular changes in the CSS, and that really is the big power of responsive design.